Okay, so then the first consideration, and that would be structure. So what I'm going to argue is that the Quran exemplifies like a fantastic sort of linguistic structure, parallelism, concentrism, sorry, and so on. And it's improbable given the way the Quran is revealed. And a note on that is that it's revealed in response to certain events that happened, right? So many of like the verses are in response to specific events. They weren't predetermined prior to its conception, right?
Wrong. The Quran was not compiled in chronological order as it was revealed.
How is the Quran organized? Its 114 surahs are not in chronological order. Some of the earliest revelations are found all the way at the end of the book, and some of the last revelations given to the Prophet ﷺ are found all the way in the beginning.
Let's lay down the ring composition miracle. Premise 1. The Quran reveals an underlying symmetry in subject order in certain surahs. Premise 2. How can Muhammad have this kind of hindsight as he was revealing in real time over his personal life? Conclusion. Therefore, there must have been divine prudence. Even if we accept the classical narrative about Muhammad's life and revelations, subject order and symmetry in the Quran has to do with the compilation, not revelation.
And so that's for the sort of ring structure, parallelism, concentrism, these sort of structures that you wouldn't expect from this sort of text, right? Especially given a false prophet hypothesis where this person is just, he's just a lying, deceiving person, right? You wouldn't expect something like an excellent structure in there. You wouldn't expect something like ring structure or anything like that. On the contrary, you'd expect no structure at all. You probably wouldn't even expect it to be like a good linear structure, because he's just coming up with it as things go along. He doesn't know what's going to happen, right? You wouldn't even expect good linear or ring structure.
Firstly, you say he was just coming up with it as things go along. Yet the Quran was compiled later and not in chronological order, according to Muhammad's revelations. The mere fact that you don't mention that demonstrates how naively you approach this issue.
You wouldn't expect something like ring structure or anything like that.
Then you say you wouldn't expect ring structure. Are you sure about that?
My dissertation is on classical Arabic poetry, and I was surprised, even though I was impressed with it and of course heard so much of the Arabs praising their poetry, but many Western critics from the 19th century, from the 20th century, were actually saying about the old Arabic poems that they consist of beautiful individual lines, but there's no real connecting thread between lots of the lines. It's sort of as if the poems were haphazardly thrown together. And my dissertation is on something called ring composition, where, and some of the professors and others have, arguing against this, of course, showing the poems, these great poems, are not just hodgepodges put together, but there's very much of a pattern to the way the lines are interconnected. This is what my dissertation was on, and my main study in college and university was on. But then, after graduating and coming here to Kuwait, I was surprised to find that actually many of the same specialists in Arabic literature in the West, in the UK and in Germany and the States, are saying a lot of the same things about the Quran as the way it's put together as a book. Of course, this is the fundamental text of Islam, but they're saying it consists of surahs, but there's no pattern to way.
The Quran uses literal motifs popular and almost exclusive to classical Arabic poetry. Exactly the expectation, in other words.
Lying, deceiving person, right? You wouldn't expect something like an excellent structure in there.
Then you say you wouldn't expect excellent structure in there. Is ring composition excellent structure? Does ring composition addresses essence? No, it undermines essence. Clearly. Okay, because it makes the book incomprehensible. But does ring composition addresses even musicality, poetry in other words? No, it's against. It undermines poetry, in fact. But what it addresses? What is the purpose of ring composition? Let me tell you. In fact, let Raymond Farin tell us.
Interesting. Similarly, you do find something called ring composition or concentric patterns in classical Arabic poetry. And this is said early poetry was not written down, but it was memorized, and poets would memorize. And this is maybe a mnemonic device that helps you recall a poet when he recites a verse, and then a second verse, third verse, fourth, whatever, it gets to the middle, and then sort of remembers, okay, working your way back out of the poem. You find these similar patterns in stories, in poem literature, and it's definitely, you find them in Arabic literature. What differentiates the Quran is the amazing interconnection, the way it's so much more densely interconnected.
Allah compromises the essence of his text, his message, the comprehension, in other words, of his text. Also, he compromises the poetry, the beauty of his text, in order to find a way to memorize better his text, exactly like nomads of the 7th century. Is the Quranic literal structure efficient to convey its message?
It's not in size order, clearly, and it's definitely not in subject order, as the subject repeats itself and some things that have been brought up earlier come up over again and again and again and again, and maybe sometimes in more detail than before. It's not even about the organization of surahs, it's also what's happening inside of a single surah. Large surahs like Baqarah or Ali Imran or Nisa or Ma'idah, surahs like that, you'll find lots of different subjects all bunched together in a way that for some casual reader might be surprising. They might not even see a connection between where this passage ends and the next one begins, and why is it going from this subject to another? It seems like it belongs in a different chapter altogether.
So this is from an Arabic scholar, Gert Puin, who's the one who, he's a manuscript scholar of the Quran. And he says, the Quran claims for itself that it is mubin, or clear. But if you look at it, you will notice that every fifth sentence or so simply doesn't make sense. Many Muslims and Orientalists will tell you otherwise, of course, but the fact is that a fifth of the Quranic text is just incomprehensible. This is what has caused the traditional anxiety regarding translation. If the Quran is not comprehensible, if it can't even be understood in Arabic, then it's not translatable. People fear that, and since the Quran claims repeatedly to be clear, but obviously is not, as even speakers of Arabic will tell you, there is a contradiction. So that's Gert Puin. And then we have, of course, the famous Ali Dashti in his book, 23 Years, says, the Quran contains sentences which are incomplete and not fully intelligible without the aid of commentaries, foreign words, unfamiliar Arabic words, and words used with other than the normal meaning, adjectives and verbs inflected without observance of the concords of gender and number, illogically and ungrammatically applied pronouns which sometimes have no referent, and predicates which in rhymed passages are often remote from the subjects. These and other such aberrations in the language have given scope to critics who deny the Quran's eloquence.
Those of you who have had a chance to read the Quran, have you noticed there are no complete stories? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that when you read the Quran, it doesn't go, there's no theme that it follows? It jumps all over the place. It may start with John the Baptist, it may jump to Moses, then go back to Abraham, and then it may have something that come to another reference that you know nothing about, or it doesn't really begin or end. It assumes you already know the background to the story. And the Quran is full of that. It jumps all over the place. There's no chronology, there's no transitional phrases to help you to go from story to story. It's confusing, it's full of repetition. Jumps all over from one topic to another, inconsistencies in its grammar, law, and theology. Verbs have been left out, adjectives have been left out in other places, and that's why it's so confusing for Muslims to read. In fact, 20% of the Quran is not even understood by the scholars. A fifth of this book, even the scholars don't understand.
The literal structure of the Quran to the regular reader is so bad that it's almost incomprehensible. In response to that, there is some underlying textual symmetry. Few specialists, scholars of Islam, discover it over the course of history. Not apparent to the regular reader, but not even apparent to most scholars in history. Just recently made comprehensive by a book of Raymond Farin in 2014.
And
Cool.
Raymond
Interesting
Farron.
combination.
His book is entitled Structure and Quranic Interpretation, a study of symmetry and coherence in Islam's holy text. To me, this is a groundbreaking work. It's a very important book, and I wish that it would be translated into Arabic so that Arabic scholars would also have an opportunity to look at the Quran from this particular angle. It is a very new angle on the Quran, actually one that has been developing for some time through the work of many scholars to whom Raymond Farron has referred to in his book. But he has now brought that work to a culmination that allows us to see the beauty and harmony of the structure of the Quran as a whole. After all, it does require some interpretation. This does not just jump out at you, otherwise it wouldn't take 1,400 years of scholarship to arrive at the level to which he has arisen now.
Does symmetry in subject order helps musicality? Helps poetry? No. Just because a surah of 280 verses have symmetry in subject, that doesn't address at all musicality, the beauty of the text, the poetry. That's why you need specialized Quranic scholars to recognize this beauty with academic hindsight after 1,400 years. Is ring composition difficult to make when the subjects are so cruelly put together without transitional parts and with no consideration of essence, comprehension, or context?
It is he who has created for you all things that are on earth. Then he turned to the heaven and made them into 7 firmaments, and of all things he has perfect knowledge. Behold, your Lord said to the angels, I will create a vicegerent on earth. They said, will you place therein one who will make mischief therein and shed blood, whilst we do celebrate your praises and glorify your holy name? He said, I know what you know not.
So it jumps from one subject to the other without transitional phrases, without nothing. You claim that eloquent. That's the complete opposite of elegance. In fact, that is a mental condition called flight of thought or flight of ideas. Let me show you what is this medical condition. What we know about flight of ideas. Flight of ideas occurs when someone talks quickly and erratically, jumping rapidly between ideas and thoughts. According to the American Psychiatric Association, flight of ideas is a type of thought disorder that causes some people to speak rapidly and quickly shift between loosely connected ideas when speaking. Okay, so the Quran is elegant for a mental disorder. For a book, not so much. See, guys, look at something. As I was going to these verses, I went to some verses before. Deliverance of law. Prophet Muhammad's, peace and blessing be upon him, delivers law to Muslims. Okay, look what this text says at the end.
When Talut set forth with the armies, he said, Allah will test you at the stream. If any drinks of its water, he goes not with my army. Only those who taste not of it go with me. A mere sip out of the hand is excused. But they all drank of it, except a few, when they crossed the river, he and the faithful ones with him. They said, this day we cannot cope with Goliath and his forces. But those who were convinced that they must meet Allah said, how often by Allah's will has a small force vanquished a big one. Allah is with those who steadfastly persevere. When they advanced to meet Goliath and his forces, they prayed, our Lord, pour out constancy on us and make our steps firm. Help us against those that reject faith. By Allah's will, they routed them. And David slew Goliath, and Allah gave him power and wisdom and taught him whatever else he willed. And did not Allah check one set of people by means of another? The earth would indeed be full of mischief, but Allah is full of bounty to all the worlds.
So, suddenly a story of Goliath. Yet here it says, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessed be upon him, delivers law to Muslims. Yet we see a story of Goliath. Okay, guys, should I waste my time to go further investigating that? The truth is, Reformed Salafi, that this graph is nonsense, utter nonsense. The categories Raymond Farin puts together are not precise. They contain other things as well. They are not exact. They are loosely put together. For example, 1 to 20 is Allah's endless whining against disbelievers. 20 verses saying the same thing. So he doesn't put, for example, endless, without essence, whining against disbelief. The second part, he says God's creation, when in fact it's very little bit God's creation. It's continuation of the Allah's whining about disbelief. Yet he says here God's creation. Also includes in the second category the Quranic challenge. Why he didn't mention that? Then he adds Adam and Eve, when it's very little bit about Adam and Eve. At the end, just a couple of verses. In other words, these categories are not precise. He invents categories. Raymond Farin is a Muslim. He wants to see stuff in the text. But even if we assume that in general, in very general sense, there is some kind of ring composition, the categories are just 5 categories. When the subjects are so cruelly put together, it's very easy to make this ring composition. Okay, you just divide the text in 6 categories. What's the problem? And you put the categories like a ring composition, as Arabs of the 7th century, predating the Quran, used to do to memorize. What is the problem? That's not a miracle, by no stretch of the imagination. If you ask somebody to do a ring composition like this, he would have done a better job. I would have done a better job than the Quran. Moreover, the ring composition is not consistent in all the Quran. It's just in certain surahs. In other surahs, there is some other kind of symmetry that, judging from what I saw in this surah, you invent this symmetry. It's not you discovering this symmetry. In any case, Reformed Salafi, when you are presenting in a debate such a complex issue with so many complex parameters to consider, how can you expect the person in a debate to be able to respond to that? Totally unreasonable. Totally unreasonable. Was Raymond Farin's book peer-reviewed by Western academics? No, it's just a book. So what? Why we should take Raymond Farin's claims as true? Just I took one of his claims and I saw so many problems in his claims. Okay. Then you use words so loosely. You say elegant structure. Where is the elegant structure? The complete opposite. You say, how can we expect that considering Muhammad's life? Yet you didn't mention that the compilation of the Quran was not according to Muhammad's life. All these details. Okay, that was not an academic presentation. Sorry. This is not how scholarship works. Reformed Salafi, unfortunately. Thank you very much.